Welcome, everyone, to our co-sponsored webinar. Again, this is with SDA, the Special District Association of Colorado. My name is Anthony Sandoval, Program Manager, and this is our co-sponsored again with the Water Education Colorado. A couple of things to let everyone know: we will record this webinar, and about 2 to 3 business days we'll have it on our website. If you have any questions, please feel free to give us a call here at our office. We will be glad to answer your question or to let you know where the webinar is located. I am joined with Scott Williamson here with Water Education Colorado, and he will take the reins from here on out.
Great, thank you, Anthony. So again, my name is Scott Williamson. I coordinate the education outreach programs for Water Education Colorado, and we're the leading organization for informing and engaging Coloradans on water issues. So it's great to be here with SDA and all the special districts on the phone. SDA is a really key supporter of Water Education Colorado, and each year provides a few different scholarships for our water fluency program for non-water professionals. So we really value that partnership moving forward. We're also excited to work with the Babbitt Center to plan this webinar and some upcoming workshops we'll talk about, and Erin Rugland from the Babbitt Center will be speaking to you later today. So moving forward, we'll have 4 different speakers today who I'll just briefly introduce now so you get a lay of the webinar. First up will be Kevin Reidy from the Colorado Water Conservation Board, followed by Ann Castle from the Getches-Wilkinson Center, Erin Rugland from the Babbitt Center, and then Chris Madkin here from Fort Collins Loveland Water District. So we'll have 4 different expert speakers for you, and they'll go ahead and pass to the next speaker, so we have minimized our transitions today. And then in addition, please type any questions that you have that come up throughout the webinar, and we'll address those. We'll try to save 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to address those questions. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker for today. Kevin Reidy is introducing today's topic, and Kevin is the State Water Conservation Technical Specialist from the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Kevin worked for 7 years at Aurora Water before this position, when he started in 2009, and he provides technical and financial assistance to special districts and others putting together their water efficiency plans and other programs. So without further ado, Kevin, please take it away.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Okay, we'll get into this. I'll just kick this off really quickly with an introduction of the guidance document. Been a really great project so far, and you'll see what's in it through the webinar. And I'll talk a little bit more about the why and how and those kind of things as we go forward. So the why. So many of you might be familiar with the Water Conservation Act in Colorado, and some of you might not be. But basically, if you were over 2,000 acre-feet of water, so basically deliver that much water a year, you're required by the statute to have a water conservation plan on file with the CWCB. And that really it's a requirement for you to get state funds. So whether they're grants or loans or things like that. So that's kind of one of the basic kind of baselines for this idea of these water efficiency plans, but really they're really good planning tools to have on hand and to kind of chart your future demand as you go forward. Now, there was a new element introduced in 2015, implemented in 2016, and it's a full evaluation of the best management practices for water demand management, water efficiency, and water conservation. And basically what this means is, what are you doing through land use efforts that can be tied back to your water efficiency plan? And so this was not required before, obviously, and it's a new element, but it's a really important one, as we'll get in as we go through this webinar today. It's really crucial to kind of link up these 2 parallel tracks a little bit closer. So the goal of the guidance. Now, we want to look at this, as in terms of, from the water provider's perspective, and evaluating land use practices that's best suited for you, how to do this. And a lot of you might be saying, hey, well, we don't have authority over this. How does this deal? How do we deal with this? Well, that's the whole idea behind this guidance document, is to really get the two sides to kind of start talking a little more together, planning a little bit earlier in your process, and get these things kind of more institutionalized and how you do that. And also, too, we've got this Colorado Water Plan measurable objective. By 2025, 75% of Coloradans will live in these communities that are doing this, or incorporating water savings actions into land use planning. So there's a lot of benefits to this, as you may or may not know. And we were just talking about this earlier. The initial configuration of development influences future water demand. And we always call it, water smart from the start, in a way, because it's really time-consuming and expensive to retrofit this stuff, as you go down the road. If you are doing toilet rebates or faucet rebates or shower heads or landscape, those kind of things, they can, really add up. And you're really only getting a small percentage of your existing customers when you're doing that. And so this is really another toolbox, or tool in the toolbox, for dealing with the increased demand and limited supplies of the future that we expect to be seeing in Colorado. It will enhance your ability to absorb growth and increase resilience as well in terms of drought management and or climate change as we go forward. And also, too, is if we're talking about the configuration and land use patterns, we could be seeing increased floods as well. So this is another way to kind of look at in a more holistic pattern and see how you're developing and what kind of water efficiency benefits you can get from this too. Now, the good news is that we've got some state funding available for this through a couple of different programs. I'm basically run two grant programs at the CWCD. One is the Water Efficiency Grant Program, and really what this does is it directly deals with water efficiency plans and drought mitigation plans at the municipal and special district level. And really what we have is about $550,000 a year, if it's a good year with severance tax, to create water efficiency plans and then to implement those things that are outlined in the plans, which is great. It's a direct kind of relationship there. We've got another, and there's no deadlines in those. Those are just kind of a rotating group of grant planning funds. But we've also got Colorado Water Plan grants, which this year we've got about $1.75 million, which is a pretty good chunk of money. And these are focused on conservation and land use projects. And we've had a number of really good projects so far. Everything from landscape retrofits to low-income fixture replacements to very robust land use and water efficiency trainings that we're running. So really good projects coming through that one as well. Not necessarily tied to your water efficiency plan directly, but a good addition. Next application deadline will be February 1st, 2020. We just had a application deadline last week for the August round. So the future of the guidance document and how we're going to kind of go about this, we're talking about education and outreach here, and how we're going to try to get this out to folks and make it more useful for you, as useful as we can. Obviously, we're doing this webinar today with Special District Association. We're going to do another one with Colorado Municipal League, so that if you can attend a workshop, then you've got some resources to look back on. We're going to do a quick presentation, about a half an hour, at Colorado Water Congress, August 20th, and I think it's 9:30 to 10 a.m. It's in the special workshops section on Tuesday, August 20th. And then we've got 4 full-day workshops around the state. We're trying to get out and reach as many people as we can. So September 16th, we've got one in Longmont. I believe it's at the county. The one location I do know, this county building off of the highway, I-25 there, September 16th. Durango, October 30th. Pueblo, November 5th, and Grand Junction, November 12th. So hopefully we can, we'll see you at some of these workshops, and we can reach out to you guys and really work with you directly to implement this guidance. And I've got my contact information somewhere in here, and feel free to reach out to me if you're having trouble doing this in a water efficiency plan, because that's part of my main job, is I really work on the technical assistance with you all to make the best plans you can. So so I'll pass it on to Ann Castle with the Getches-Wilkinson Center, University of Colorado. Take it away, Ann.
Thanks, Kevin. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for participating in this webinar today. I'm going to talk about how this guidance document was developed, the research we did, who we talked to, with the goal of helping you figure out how to use it in a way that's most helpful to you. So we started about 1.5 years ago, and as Kevin said, the guidance was instigated by the legislation in 2015, and the concern that because there are many water suppliers that haven't previously worked with the land use departments that have jurisdiction over their service areas. So they weren't familiar with how to do this integration of land use and water effectively, or what they could do, what sort of practices they could use. So our goal was to describe best practices that are relevant to Colorado water providers and to give guidance on how to interact between land use departments and water supplier personnel. We wanted to use Colorado examples because they'll be the most meaningful to all the water suppliers in the area, and we wanted to keep it practical. So we started out with a literature review. We reviewed a ton of reports and articles and presentations, and we found that a lot of the literature that's out there is aimed at land use department personnel, at planners, and there's not much that is geared toward water suppliers. So part of our task was to fill that gap. So we looked at all the literature available. We picked out the most promising discussion areas and the techniques that people were using, and we tried to tailor that to Colorado. Then we did a bunch of interviews. We talked to 10 different Colorado water providers in a fair amount of detail, and we selected those 10 in order to get diversity in geography. So we wanted water districts and municipalities across the state. We wanted different sizes of water providers, and we had everybody from a district that was just barely at that 2,000 acre-foot threshold that Kevin mentioned, all the way up to the biggest, like Denver Water and Aurora Water. When we also wanted to get diversity between water districts that don't have land use authority and municipal water providers that have the land use planning department within the same governmental umbrella. And when we interviewed municipal providers, many of those interviews included both the water utility personnel and the planners from the planning department. We asked these folks about the type of interactions that the water provider and the land use planning department have now. What are you doing? What are you talking about? And we were trying to get examples and good ideas of things that people have already tried and been successful with. And then we asked about what would be most helpful to the water providers in terms of guidance. What kind of narrative or guidance document could you use? We also put together an advisory committee of 15 experts in the field. These were representatives of major water providers that have had some experience integrating water supply or water conservation and land use planning, representatives from CML, from SDA, from state government like the CWCB and DOLA, elected officials like county commissioners, and folks from NGOs that were focused on this integration of water and land use. So the initial process that we went through was to produce a checklist of best practices, just a 4 or 5 page document that really just had one sentence descriptions of the best practices that we had gleaned from literature, from the interviews, and from talking with our advisory committee. We had that reviewed by the advisory committee, and then from that foundation, we produced a first draft of the guidance document that you now have. We had another review by the advisory committee, produced a second draft, and then we had a workshop in October of last year with the purpose of getting broader input. on a document that had already gone through a couple of different versions. We had good participation. We held it in Summit County to try to help attract people from throughout the state. And we had good diverse representation. We had water providers, we had folks who worked in cities and counties, both in the water utilities and in the planning department, NGOs, consultants who have been involved in preparing water conservation plans, and representatives from both DRCOG and Northwest COG. We provided the draft guidance document, the draft that existed at the time, a couple of weeks in advance so that people had an opportunity to review it. And then we asked for their feedback on how helpful is it? How do you like the format? Is it readable? Are the things we're saying practical? And very importantly, what's missing? So after that workshop, we incorporated the suggestions that we got there, produced a third version, got final input from Kevin and CWCB staff, came up with a fourth and final version that was transmitted to the CWCB at the end of last year. And then the board considered that version of the guidance document at its January meeting this year, and it was approved and adopted by the CWCB as the official guidance. So a couple of lessons learned during this process that we found particularly telling. We found and we heard from a lot of people that it was extremely helpful to elected officials to have examples of other communities in Colorado that have taken similar actions. So if you're a county commissioner or a member of a city council or an elected water district board member, you can feel much more comfortable voting for approval of some proposal to do things a little differently than has been done before if you know that other communities have done the same thing. And so we tried in the guidance document to include a ton of examples and case studies that are electronically linked to the substantive documents with the water district or the community involved. And then secondly, we heard concerns about how do I choose among all of these different best practices, help me prioritize. And that's a little tricky because there is no one-size-fits-all guidance here because we have such diversity of water providers across the state in size, in demographics. So there's no way to prioritize what we've got in this document in a way that would work for everybody. But what we could do was to provide general principles to guide your selection of the practices that will work best for your community. You can see that on the screen now. It's also on page 11 of the guidance document. And these are questions that you can ask yourself. What are the biggest challenges in my community? Is it growth? Is it water supply? Is it keeping the ag economy vibrant? What are the demographics? And there's a lot of good information here that hopefully will help you select among the literally hundreds of best practices in the guidance. That's a good transition to Erin Rugland, who's going to speak next. Erin is a research fellow with the Babbitt Center for Land and Water Policy and a wonderful colleague and a primary co-author of this guidance document you have now. Erin?
Thank you very much, Anne. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar this morning. I'll be taking us through the format and how to use the guidance addendum. So as Anne mentioned, we closely mirrored the 2012 guidance document. So by that, I mean we replicated the format. You can see the similar covers here. So we have a similar appearance, and on the inside too, similar headings and sections. So you should be able to use the two documents pretty seamlessly together. It also uses the same organization of best practices into 4 major categories, and each section has multiple best practices, resulting in hundreds of examples and case studies. There is no one-size-fits-all solution proposed, so this document is a great cookbook for water providers of all sizes and capacities. And each example has a direct web link for more information, and that information may be to another water provider that has implemented a practice, to a report with more information on the subject, or to tools that can help practitioners collect and analyze the necessary data for any of the practices. The introduction of the document covers the background information, some of which Anne just went over, the organization of the document, the audience for the addendum, and a brief discussion of the terminology used throughout the document. For example, we use the term planning department regardless of if a municipality has a planning department by name or if their land use planning is done by some other office, such as community development. The introduction also covers how the best practices detailed in the addendum fit into one water planning. In essence, many of the practices are tailored not just to drinking water, but to stormwater, wastewater, and other water sectors, so they can be applied through an integrated approach to water management. While a water provider may not have jurisdiction over stormwater or wastewater, the same principles will still apply, and the concept of one water can fit into this broader effort to integrate water efficiency in land use planning. So here we have an example page. Information like this makes up most of the document. So each section following the introduction details the best practices according to the 4 major categories. So in any of these categories, there are sub-practices, examples, and case studies. So sometimes, like in practice 9 here, you have the heading and it's kind of defined by further examples and sub-practices, or you have an example like number 10 where it's detailed in a narrative with a separate example. And then each of the 4 major sections has a case study as well. And this one, for instance, we'll hear about later in this webinar this morning. So now I'll walk you through the 4 major categories of best practices. These are foundational activities, targeted technical assistance and incentives, ordinances and regulations, and education activities. It's worth noting that these practices could be implemented in a way different than laid out in this guidance addendum. For instance, a water provider could decide to take a practice described here as an ordinance and turn it into an incentive program instead. Additionally, different implementation mechanisms can be used to support the practices, such as creating an education program to bolster the success of a regulation. The most appropriate means of implementing any of these best practices should be decided by each water provider in collaboration with their land use authority. So going into each of these sections, I'll keep it kind of high level, listing the main practices of each section. And I'm happy to answer further questions during the Q&A, and during the workshops, we'll dive deeply into each of these as well. So the first section is foundational activities, and we recommend these as kind of the starting point for any water provider. The foundational activities encourage establishing a working relationship between the water provider and land use authority. These practices are fundamental for collaborative implementation of water efficient land use measures with the land use authority. A working relationship with a land use authority can be particularly important for special district and private water providers if you are not part of the same governing entity as your planning department. But either way, the practices similarly apply to municipal providers. So the practices here you can see on the screen, and these are establish regular contact and sharing of information between the water provider and planning department, align data and information used, establish coordinated procedures for post-occupancy monitoring and enforcement, integrate water considerations into the development approval process, and integrate long-term land use and water planning. So these are, again, all mechanisms to establish a relationship with the land use authority that can really be built upon to implement some of the practices in the other sections. The second section builds on the targeted technical assistance and incentives that are laid out in the 2012 guidance document. Each of these can be considered and operated jointly by the land use authority and the water provider. Incentives may be preferred over mandates for local governments, water providers, property owners, or developers. The practices in this section can be used to encourage water efficient behavior, building, or urban form, and can be used to help with compliance with other regulations. So the main practices for targeted and technical assistance and incentives are on the screen here. The next section addresses municipal or county code provisions for adoption by a land use authority. Each of these should be evaluated according to whether they will support the water provider's water conservation goals and if they are appropriate for the water provider's service area. Water providers may vary in their authority to adopt regulations. Some of the ordinances or regulations will require discussion between the water provider and land use authority to help determine what may be the best fit for the community, whether that be your water customer or residents. Collaboration is also required to determine the process for adoption between the water provider and land use authority. And of particularly importance for ordinances and regulations is considering how they will be monitored and enforced between the water provider and the land use authority, or if another entity may be involved in helping with reporting and monitoring compliance with any of these. The final category is the education activities section, and these are intended, again, to be carried out collaboratively between a water provider and land use authority. These will help educate a community about the water policies and regulations and other practices that are described throughout the addendum. And coordinating these activities with the land use authority can help send a unified message to water customers and developers to prevent confusion or contradiction about anything else that you may be implementing. Education activities can be particularly powerful if done across the region, whether with other water providers or through a regional authority. And then the final pieces of the guidance addendum are the worksheets. So these worksheets build upon the ones used in the 2012 guidance document as well. And these have been updated with the practices laid out in the guidance addendum. So these help a provider walk through each best practices and consider which may be most applicable, feasible, or create the biggest water savings. So they're available in PDF form at the end of the document or as a separate Excel sheet, which can be easier to use and fill out. The final piece of the addendum is the sample plan addendum. So again, this builds on and mirrors the sample plan that was done with the 2012 guidance document. So water providers can reference this sample plan for more ideas on how practices can be implemented and written about in a water efficiency plan. We developed this with fictional examples for both a municipal provider and a water district to illustrate how practices and implementation may differ between these two types of entities. And now I'll turn it over to Chris Matkins, District Manager for Fort Collins Loveland Water District, to discuss how they've forayed into land use activities and their experience collaborating with different land use authorities.
Well, thanks, Erin, and good morning, everybody. My name is Chris, and I'm the General Manager for a water district in Northern Colorado. I've also been a wastewater utility manager for a municipality, and so I can draw on both those experiences. Talk today a little bit about my observations and lessons learned. So what I would offer to today's conversation is maybe some frontline experience, some perspective on maybe how I've seen things work from inside the machine. From my perspective, when someone shows up to my front desk to buy a tap, it really is too late to make meaningful changes in water use. And that's something that when I was working with planners previously, was really important to us that we start to change the guiding documents that really govern how communities develop. I was really lucky to be involved in some comprehensive and master plans that I think were instrumental in getting water on the list. a lot of times planners, civic leaders, elected officials, they've got a lot to think about, and water typically has not been on their list. The kinds of things that folks focus on are housing, transportation, employment, parks, these kinds of community interests that drive these documents. And from what I've seen, water just never really had a spot on that agenda. So I do think that that's a good step forward if we can get water on the list, and I don't know that it has to be at the top of the list, but I think it needs to be in the top 5 in terms of what we talk about as communities as we determine our future. Challenges I've seen, water is complicated, and I've spent a career becoming conversant in it. I'm not an expert in all areas of it, but I think it's something that, to those of us that are in the business, we're a little blinded by how baffling it can be from the outside. And so I think it's really incumbent on us to help the community leaders and the planners who make these documents, help them understand it and be their interpreter. I don't know that these folks have a lot of time to try and understand the technicalities, but that's really where we can best fit in terms of describing this limited resource, how things are changing, and what we see on the horizon that helps them shape these really powerful documents. Lessons learned, I think that what we're up against is a big challenge, and just like the mutual ditch companies 150 years ago, it's probably bigger than any one entity can tie on to. And so just like the mutual ditch companies, I think there's going to have to be concerted efforts to identify common goals and figure out how to work together to address the fact that water is becoming more and more constrained. Some of the most powerful things, some of the most powerful advances I've seen were really just personal relationships. I remember reaching out across to planners to invite them to conferences, to help them. Heck, my department even paid for their attendance to go to these conferences to start hearing the concepts, understanding the lexicon and the words. And I found all those planners to be really curious, open-minded people, and it was a great way to start to get water on their radar. So I would offer that too, to don't be afraid to reach out across the aisle. It's too late now, but I would ask that on the checklist, maybe add take a planner out for a beer. That maybe ought to be on the checklist. So just help them speak the same language. And then the other thing I would offer is take the steps when you can. I don't believe that this can be solved with a single motion or a big sea change. I think these are going to be incremental advances. So feel good when you can take a step forward, even if it's a small step. So that's what I would offer to today's conversation. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Chris, for joining us. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and all your other responsibilities to talk with folks on the webinar today. And thank you for driving down and making the trek to Denver. So we've had a few questions come in already, and if you have questions that are running through your head, please go ahead and type them in the chat box now, and we can kind of farm them out to the appropriate speaker who can respond to your questions. So we'll start with, we have two questions that have popped up already. The first one is from Eric Dole. Eric asks, do you consider non-invasive leak detection technologies as part of a water efficiency plan? And this, I'm going to turn over to Kevin Reidy from CWCB to answer that.
Yep, thanks. So I think by non-invasive leak detection, you're talking about maybe acoustic, I'm thinking, something that you're not going in. And regardless, though, we do have an evaluation element that needs to be evaluated for each water efficiency plan, and leak detection is there, leak detection water loss. And recently, last couple of years, I've kind of expanded that idea to really not just focus on leak detection, but more comprehensive water loss management and control, and specifically using the WWA's M36 methodology. So it's kind of, leak detection is kind of a little bit in terms of a very singular kind of point, but unless you're doing a full audit of your system and understanding where that water loss is actually happening, physical leaks versus apparent losses, it's really important to kind of look at a more holistic and comprehensive way. And just a real quick plug, we've got a water loss initiative going on right now that's free for anybody who wants to come in, any kind of special district or water district or municipality. It's coloradowaterloss.org. So look at those resources and see if you can't get in. We have trainings and workshops going on for the next year or so.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it. So the next question, I don't see any follow-up questions coming through, so I'll move to the next question from Roy Horvath from La Plata. Roy says La Plata County is considering implementation of 1041 powers that would involve both domestic water and wastewater systems. To what degree has the implementation of 1041 powers impeded or encumbered the forward progress of water and wastewater systems within respective counties? And I'll go ahead and turn this one over to Ann Castle to respond to.
So I have seen relatively limited use of 1041 powers to regulate outside of major municipal water systems, which certainly have attracted 1041 attention. But we have seen 1041 regulations used specifically targeting new communities that address adequacy of water supply and the configuration of development. And so we have seen that 1041 can be successfully used to address, as both Kevin and Chris mentioned, the sort of smart from the start approach that looks at the water footprint of potential new development and regulates around what that water footprint is going to be. Because as Chris mentioned, it's so much harder to retrofit a already established development or already sold taps to get a better water conservation outcome. I'm much less familiar with the use of 1041 for wastewater systems, but I think it is a way that can be considered, and it is addressed in the guidance document, using 1041 to address the initial configuration from a water perspective of new development.
Great, thanks, Ann. And then our next question coming through has to do with climate resiliency and adaptation. And the question is the new addendum tied to broader climate resiliency and adaptation planning going on at the state level? So we're going to start with Kevin Reidy, and then I think I'll hand it over to Ann to finish up the response. Go ahead, Kevin.
Sure, great, thanks. I think with whatever we're doing, I think we are looking at climate adaptation and resiliency from this point forward. It's not my exact area of expertise. We did have a climate person on board the CWCB, and she's recently left for another job. But I think anything we're doing at the state level with these guidance documents are helping communities adapt to future drought conditions as well as climate resiliency. I think I'll leave it at that.
So I would say that, not speaking from the state perspective, but just the ability to use this guidance to address climate resiliency. And I think that concept is very much compatible with the guidance document. And I'll go back to that page of guiding principles that I pointed to earlier. On page 11 of the guidance addendum, some of the questions that it suggests that communities ask themselves have to do with, are we constrained on water supply? What are we expecting in the future? What do our demographics look like? What's our growth pattern? And that all feeds into climate adaptation and climate resiliency. I think that many communities in Colorado are confronted with the possibility that their water supplies will be shrinking. And in order to deal with that, conservation is an obvious tool. And so I think that the techniques that are suggested and described in this guidance document can help different communities adapt to whatever level of both growth and water supply they're anticipating in the future.
Great, thank you, Ann. I think the natural next question from that, or a somewhat related question, do you see the advocacy of low impact design becoming a standard or option to assist new development to accommodate the spirit of One Water?
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of this discussion, kind of moving to One Water. And I think low impact design is really very important for this. And again, like we're talking about, it's new development. So how do we figure out how we're going to grow over the next number of years to really do it better than we have in the past, and to really link it up with water efficiency and water supplies. But not just that, though, is, we're talking about stormwater, we're talking about all these other wastewater, all these other kind of ideas. And just so you know, right now we've got a grant supporting City and County of Denver and the urban, well, now it's Urban Flood District now, they're in their new name, and a bunch of departments in the City and County of Denver. And so we've got they came to get a grant from us for this, to look at a One Water plan for City and County of Denver, integrating Denver water, planning departments, public works, parks, urban flood and drainage control district, stormwater, all this stuff. So yeah, I think that's where we're going to be going in this stuff, and I think that's a really important topic to bring up.
And I would also say that at least in some of the Front Range communities that we talked with as part of putting this document together, we found that there was interest by developers who are looking to build, significant developments with a bunch of units. They're seriously considering low impact design because their customer base is demanding it. People are interested in buying new houses that have been designed in a climate-friendly manner, and that is an increasing trend. And so I think it's not as hard as it once might have been to encourage, incentivize, or require low-impact development if you're a county planner or a city planner, because that product is being demanded in the marketplace.
Great, thank you, Ann. So the next question has to do with our upcoming workshops. And the question is, will the seminar in Grand Junction in November be helpful for planning water management pertaining to irrigation water? So yes, so Kevin, do you want to?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. That's a really interesting one. And irrigation water is a different animal, I think, in terms of what we're talking about here. Yet, if you're talking about Grand Junction, and I'm thinking of Youth Water Conservancy District, which has a very large amount of the residential lots that are using irrigation water for their irrigation. I know a small portion of it is indoor domestic. So I think in that case, I think it could be useful, and for any kind of new developments that's going to be using irrigation water. Again, it depends on how you're charging for the irrigation water. If it's a flat rate, $25 a year, you don't send too much of a signal for being more water efficient. But I think if you are planning new developments out there on irrigation water, I think it could be helpful, and to help the developer and or irrigation ditch company communicate with the county and water districts out there. That's my 2 cents. I think it's a really different animal, but I think it could be helpful.
And just to follow up on that, I think our 2 speakers in that area can speak to some degree from the special district and municipal relationship as it comes to the irrigation practices. So, so the next question coming up is for Kevin. So Kevin, who in addition to the CWCB is offering in-depth training and technical assistance in the integrated land use water planning arena?
Well, good question. And so, I always like to think of this as none of this stuff could happen without partnerships, right? I'm one person at the CWCB, and that's it. So, got to work with partners and everything else. So, I think a list of partners would be the Babbitt Center, obviously, here. The Sonoran Institute does a really great set of workshops right now about twice a year, and it's in partnership with Babbitt and Sonoran, and basically all of us at the table here. Those are really good trainings. The next one's coming up in September. Usually it's an RFP process to apply for a position in that. The next one I think is going to be sometime in April, I want to say, here in Colorado. So between Sonoran and Babbitt, I'm trying to think anybody else am I missing? And do you?
Western Resource Advocates.
Yes, yeah, Western Resource Advocates. They're doing some technical assistance as well directly to water providers and special districts as well. I think that's about it. But yeah, so it's obviously not just CWCB, but it's CWCB in partnership with a lot of people. So just want to put that out there.
Great. I want to leave a little space. Oh yeah, go ahead, Erin.
No problem. So I just want to reiterate that the Sonoran Babbitt training is called Growing Water Smart. And yeah, there will be one in just a few weeks and then one in April. So keep your eyes peeled for the one in April. And then, yeah, Western Resource Advocates is doing a lot of work in this area too. And there is this group called the Land and Water Planning Alliance that a person in DOLA helps spearhead. So in addition to the kind of technical assistance resources that are right now primarily CWCB, Sonoran Institute, and Babbitt Center, and then Western Resource Advocates, there's a lot of other folks, practitioners and NGOs alike doing research in this topic area that will lead to some cool stuff in the future.
Great, thank you, Erin. And one participant notes that the USGBC promotes this as well. Kevin, can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, U.S. Green Building Council. Yeah. Okay. Yes, and I'm not sure. I'm not all that. I'm a little bit familiar with what they're doing, but also there's I believe it's WERS, the Water Efficiency Rating System, like HERS for energy, and I think USGBC is doing that. I sometimes forget the acronyms, but if that's true, that's another one that's for new homes. It's basically a way to rate a new home on how water efficient they are in terms of inside and out. And it'd be interesting to see that kind of scaled up even to a community or a subdivision. Say, okay, here's a subdivision that rates this kind of water efficiency level at a subdivision level as well. So it'd be kind of interesting to see that. But I think I got that, but I'm not sure. If it's not right, please let us know.
That's great. And that's WERS, yeah. WERS? Okay, great. So the WERS program and it sounds like Growing Water Smart are two potential trainings to look at in addition to the others that were mentioned. I want to leave just a little bit of space for one more question, if folks have it. And one just came in. So ResNet is, this is a statement. So ResNet is going into water efficiency rating system. Oh, excuse me, sorry. ResNet is a water efficiency rating system. So through WERS. Yeah, it is doing, sorry. If ResNet is doing a water efficiency rating system. All right, time for one more question. All right, not seeing one come through. I think we'll just move into the wrap up and talk you through a few resources that are available that that we've discussed, others that I just want to emphasize the point. So coming up, we'll have resources and links that you can connect with. So the Colorado Water Plan is a great resource for water planning generally, and again, back to this objective or goal of living in water efficient communities. You can check that out in the Colorado Water Plan. Also the Water Efficiency Grant Program that Kevin spoke to, and Colorado Water Planning Grants. Those websites are there for you to refer to in the future, and all those can be searched in your internet search box as well. And then just another plug for the free workshops that we have coming up to follow up on this webinar with a more in-depth look at this idea of integrating land use practices into water efficiency plans. We have one coming up very quickly in Longmont on September 16th. That will be at the Southwest Weld County building from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. And then you can see the rest of the workshops here. If you'd like to follow up and register for one of the workshops, you can go to Water Education Colorado's website, and then the shortened link is there at the bottom of your screen to register. And registration for all 4 workshops are active. And again, those workshops are for a similar audience, so water providers and folks in a position to write, review, or approve water efficiency plans. So that's one last plug for the workshops. And then I just want to thank everybody on the phone for being here and spending some of your Monday morning with us. And then I want to thank all of the panelists, Erin, Kevin, Chris, and Anthony. Thank you for setting this up. So really appreciate everyone on the phone, and please feel free to reach out to any individual presenter. We will send out those emails in the follow-up to this webinar. So thank you very much, and
thank you, and thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for doing this. Hopefully this will not be the last. We can continue to educate. And again, for everyone, we have this recorded, so it will be on our website in 2 to 3 business days. Thank you.